How are you doing? How you doing, Aquilin? Yes, we are doing something a little different today. Rather than there, we are watching videos from the United States Chemical Safety Bureau, or at least that's what we're starting with. And let me actually read out their full name: United States Chemical Safety and Hazmat Hazard Investigation Board. Essentially, think of them as a sort of branch of OSHA. Not exactly. They're not. I don't think they're actually connected to OSHA, but they're sort of in the same ballpark where they're responsible for safety regulation, and as a result, take a very keen interest in whenever accidents happen. See, actually, what office are they under the purview of? I'm kind of curious now. Let's see here. Chemical Safety Bureau. Ah, yes, here we are. The United States Chemical Safety and Hazard Investigation Board, generally referred to as the Chemical Safety Board, or CSB, is an independent U.S. federal agency charged with investigating industrial chemical accidents. So basically, anytime you hear about a refinery exploding or an oil well blowing out, oh, you'll love these. All of these animations. So some of these earlier animations aren't great. I mean, it's pretty scuff stuff. It's stuff that's, very much designed for functionality, but they started to realize, I want to say like a year or two ago, that by making things that is actually okay. So Cat 90, what's Cat 90? Let me see what the hell. What is Cat 90, Quillen? What? Like, I'm not familiar with the term because it may not actually be under their purview. Oh, hello there, Dust. No, we are just discussing the nature of the U.S. Chemical Safety Board and their interest in investigating. That sounds like some fun shit, Aquilin. That sounds like some real fun shit. But no, these are not so much the people, though. That is actually something to take up with OSHA. Because, as we all know, it's been said a million times, OSHA rules are written in blood. So, if you see something like that, that's the people you report it to. These people, the CSB, are responsible for investigating and issuing guidance for industrial accidents. However, unfortunately, unlike OSHA, they don't have any real teeth. So that's something you would want to take up with OSHA. Remember, you have the right to refuse an unsafe workplace. If you feel that your employer is jeopardizing your safety, contact the Occupational Safety and Health Administration today. Always, always, always know that you have that right, even if your employer tries to discriminate. And sure, and then of course, well, you have to weigh the cost of what's going to happen to you when you do that. But if you believe that your workplace is deliberately and gratuitously unsafe, report it to OSHA. Always report that to OSHA. I mean, unfortunately, that doesn't work on the that doesn't work with Renvalia because OSHA has no authority on the copper compulsion. But if your workplace is terrestrial and specifically in the bounds under the purview of the U.S., one way or another, it's an American company or it's in the U.S., report that shit to OSHA. Of course, or thanks for the follow, Aquilin. Thank you for the follow. Because yes, your safety at work is always, always important. An Adeptus Custodes approved safe work site. I'm just imagining now you mention it, I'm just imagining a huge bulky motherfucker in Custodes armor with his helmet and a clipboard walking through the copper compulsion, just taking notes about all the shit that Ren is doing wrong. But anyways, let's get started with some of these videos, shall we? Because they get very interesting very quickly. Let's see. What should we start with? Should we go for something dramatic? Or should we go with something small? We have a few options here after all. Go Texas City. Blind filling. Bhopal. Ah, good idea, actually. Good idea. So you know what? We're going to start with one that the same one Woozle actually started with, which is about a paper mill. Actually, now that I'm thinking about this, I might want to switch browsers because reasons. Don't worry about it. So go to here. Go to here. Let's use Firefox for this because Firefox has all my plugins and shit on there. So you won't have to deal with ads unlike with Chrome. That just makes more sense to me in hindsight now that I'm thinking about it. Hey, OBS, where the hell is Firefox? Firefox is open. What are you talking about? Firefox is right the fuck there. Good lord. There it is. Got it. Okay, good. That real quickly while we get back to page. I don't need any of you seeing my search history. So as before, USCSB. Go to fire at Evergreen Packing. And now we get to see the wonderful horrors.
September 21st, 2020. The Evergreen Packaging Paper Mill in Canton,
Pull
North
that over
Carolina.
here.
2 contract workers were fatally injured by a fire that
Pull
erupted in a confined space when a heat gun fell
Perfect.
into a bucket of flammable
Then we pull
resin.
this over here like
The incident at Evergreen
There we
Packaging
go.
involves 2
And
common
as we can
safety issues.
And let us
Hot
begin
work
now.
and confined space
Oh,
safety.
do you know
Have led to
Aquilin?
many major
Do you know
incidents
this
investigated
company?
by the CSB.
Tell me about them,
Proper
won't you?
identification of hazards, including policies and procedures to control those hazards, can prevent these tragic incidents from occurring. Facility owners and operators must provide safety oversight and direction to contractors just as they would to employees.
This is all
This
very
is
important.
particularly
And once
important
again, like I
when
said,
2 contractors are operating in close
as an employee,
proximity.
you have the right to report any unsafe workplace environment
During
to
September
OSHA
2020,
in the U.S. anyways.
the Evergreen
Of course,
Packaging Paper
depending
Mill
on where
was
you are,
undergoing a
you should
planned
you
shutdown,
will need to find your
during which
equivalent
maintenance
authority.
Work was occurring throughout the facility.
Fortunately for these people,
In one
they're
of the mill's
contractors.
units,
That
a
means
contract
that
company known as
their
Blasco
pathway to
was
report something
performing
like this to
repairs in a
OSHA
vessel
would have
called
been
an
much more
upflow tower.
complicated.
Another contract company, Rimcor, was working in a different vessel called a downflow tower. The 2 vessels were connected at the top by a large diameter pipe. Blasco was tasked with repairing approximately 30 feet of the inside surface of the upflow tower, which was made of a material comprised of
Yeah,
fiberglass
Aquilin,
matting
to me,
and
I'm gonna say, you know what that
epoxy
sounds
vinyl
like?
ester resin,
You know what that
otherwise
sounds like to
known
me?
as fiber reinforced plastic.
It sounds
or
like
FRP.
Evergreen got a
To
lot of
repair the
complaints,
tower, the
and this
contractors
was their
would
way
grind
of
away the
using
old
temps like that.
damaged material,
Was their way
then apply
of getting
alternating
away from
sheets
those
of new
complaints.
fiberglass with layers of resin.
Because permanent
The rate at
employees
which
with
the resin
this awful
hardens
environment the company
depends
had them
on
working in
several factors,
would complain.
including
So
ambient
this heavy
temperature.
usage of temporary
The resin hardens
really
faster
stinks.
in warmer temperatures.
Oh
On
boy.
the other hand, the resin takes longer to harden in cooler weather. And this is what Blasco workers experienced on the night of September 20th. On the particularly cool night, the resin and fiberglass matting slid down the walls of the upflow tower before the resin could harden. Blasco workers attempted several means of troubleshooting the resin, but were ultimately unsuccessful and continued to struggle. Sometime after 2
That's
a.m.
definitely
on
sketchy.
September 21st,
But
2
this
Blasco
moment
workers
here
resorted to
also
using
shows one
an
of the other
electric
important things
heat
about
gun
occupational
to
safety,
warm the resin,
and that is
causing
it's
it to
not
harden
always
faster.
your employer
The Blasco
that creates the
crew did
danger.
not communicate to
Sometimes
Evergreen
it could be one of
or
your
the
coworkers.
Rimcor contractor
And as a result,
working in the
you
connected tower
also have a
that they were
responsibility
using
to
the
make
heat gun.
sure that whenever one of
At
your
approximately
coworkers is
5:15
being
a.m.,
unsafe,
the heat
you
gun fell
make sure to
into a
correct that
5-gallon
action.
bucket
One
of
of
the
my
flammable
favorite
resin.
stories about
A fire erupted inside the upflow
well,
tower.
one of my favorite stories
The Blasco
about
workers
such a
inside
thing
the
where
tower
you have
did
a
not
responsibility to
fire
make sure your
extinguisher
coworkers
or
aren't
other
creating
means to put
an
out the
unsafe
fire.
environment It's an old
They
one about
quickly
two guys
evacuated.
on a construction site.
Smoke and
On a work
flames
site.
from the fire
One
traveled rapidly
was an
through
old
the
guy. It was an old
connecting
guy and a younger
pipe to the
guy,
downflow tower,
and they were
where
hammering
two
in a
Ring Corps
stake. I don't know
contractors
why,
were
but they had. I don't know what it was for,
They were
but they had to
overcome
hammer
by
in
the
this
smoke
stake.
and
The
unable
old
to
guy
escape.
told the young guy to just hold on
Both
to the stake while
workers
he hammered
were
away at it.
fatally injured.
The young guy was really skeptical of it and
During
wanted
its
to try
investigation,
and make
the
sure that the
CSB
stake was
identified
secured
4
instead.
safety issues
But
that led
under
to the
pressure from the
incident
old
at
guy,
Evergreen Packaging.
he eventually gave in.
Hot work
Especially after,
safety,
the old guy was saying, "Don't worry,
pre-job
I never
planning,
miss."
confined space safety,
Take a guess at what happened
and
next.
combustible materials of vessel construction.
Hot work safety is a major safety issue that we identified during our investigation. We found that Blastco workers did not recognize the heat gun as an ignition source. As a result, proper hot work permitting and effective safety precautions were
He
not
broke
implemented.
both of his hands,
The
Dusk.
CSB found
And this young
that
man,
the heat gun could
yeah,
produce
this
temperatures
young
in
man,
excess of the resin's flash point and auto ignition temperatures.
I want to say,
Therefore, it should have been
lost one of his
recognized as an
hands,
ignition source,
and
its use should have been considered hot work under both
as a result,
Evergreen's
was
and
no longer
Blastco's
able
definitions.
to work in
But Blastco
construction,
workers
which
did
was
not
particularly
recognize
bad
the use of
because the
heat
young man
gun
in
as a hot
question
work hazard,
was
because it did
not
not produce a flame
did not
or
have many
spark,
particular
and they did not
prospects.
inform
This
Evergreen
old
or
man,
Ring Corps
in his
of its use.
recklessness and his
Had
desire to
Blastco
cut
recognized
corners
the use of the heat
out of
gun as hot
arrogance,
work, their
may
own
have,
procedures would
in
not
one
have
single
allowed its
stroke,
use in a confined space in the presence of flammable
injured
resin.
his younger
It is
injured
important for
his
companies
his
to
younger
train their
counterpart
workers on different types
into
of hot work.
poverty.
Some forms of hot work,
He just
like heat
he just
guns,
destroyed
don't
that
produce
man's
sparks
life
or open flames.
because he
Blastco should
never
update its
misses.
policies and training to include
And that
the
to
use
me
of
is
non-flame
insane.
and non-spark producing tools
Oh, I just realized,
that
yeah,
can
that's
serve as ignition
better.
sources
That's
as
much
hot
better.
work.
So yeah, no,
Another
Aquilin.
safety issue
The guy lost
identified
one
by
of
the
his hands,
CSB
and
was
the
a
other
lack of
one
pre-job
is
planning.
still was apparently, and the
Blastco
other one
workers were not
was also
sufficiently
quite severely
prepared to
injured, but they
apply
managed to
resin
save
during
that one.
cold weather and did not have a plan to safely troubleshoot the problem of the resin hardening too slowly. For example, the CSB found that Blastco had 2 drum heating vans available at the time of the incident.
I've
that could have
seen
safely warmed the
injuries
resin in a
from
drum
printers,
outside the
Aquilin.
upflow
I've seen
tower,
injuries from
negating the
printers.
need for the
Oh
heat gun.
God.
But because these
Ugh.
drum heating
So one of the
vans
things
were
that I
not
like to
identified
follow,
during
which
pre-job
aside
planning
from being
as
introduced to
equipment
this by
workers might
Woozle,
need,
piqued
they
my
were not
interest
staged
in the
for
CSB
use,
videos,
and Blastco
is
workers
I
could not
also am
locate
fond
them.
of following
As a result,
traumatic
workers
medicine.
resorted to using a heat
Basically,
gun instead, which
basically
ultimately ignited the
accounts that
resin
show
inside the
medical,
upflow tower.
that show
Hot
how
work should be
very
avoided if
dramatic
a safer
and
alternative is available.
severe injuries are
Effective
treated
pre-job planning
by
could have
surgeons.
prevented this incident.
And as a result, I have
Blastco
seen
could have used a
several
troubleshooting guide to
examples
address the
of some
cold
of the
weather,
worst
or
injuries
may
that
have
can
been able to
happen
delay the
in
work
industrial
until ambient
accidents.
temperatures were warmer.
I've seen people with
A third safety issue identified by the
people
CSB
whose arms are
was
effectively
confined
rendered
space
boneless.
safety.
I've seen people
The
that have
upflow
lost
and
half their
downflow
face.
towers
And
at Evergreen
amazingly
Packaging
enough,
were permit
more amazingly
required
than that,
confined spaces.
I've seen just
OSHA
how far
requires
medicine
that a
has
confined
come.
space entry be
Yeah, I've seen just how
terminated
that is
whenever, among
amazing,
other
isn't it?
conditions,
It is
a
amazing to
condition
think
that is not
that
allowed
something that
under
looks
the
so
entry
bad that you
permit
think is a
arises
total
in
loss,
or near
they can
the
save
permit
it.
space.
The advances that
Blastco's
medicine has
confined
made
space
and that
policy
revealed
contained
are
a similar
amazing.
requirement.
But
The heat gun,
what happened to your
an
friend is also a
ignition
sobering
source,
reminder of
constituted a
how those
condition
advances
that
got
was
made.
not allowed under the entry permit. But Blastco did not recognize the ignition hazard. Therefore, Blastco did not terminate its confined space entry when the heat gun was introduced into the space. And the CSB found that Evergreen, Blastco, and
Yeah,
Ring Corps
no.
treated the upflow and downflow towers
No.
as separate and independent confined spaces, even though the towers were connected by a crossover pipe. Interviews
Yeah,
with
on
each
one hand,
contracting company
the guy who
revealed
turned
both
on the
companies
printer
separately
definitely should have
conducted
lost his
safety
job.
analyses
But
for the
you know who
vessel in
else
which they
you
were
should have
completing
been
work,
paying
and were
attention to,
only
Aquilin?
minimally aware of the work
You
being
should have
done
paid
in
attention to the
other vessel.
motherfucker
But the
who
CSB
allowed
found that since
somebody
the two
without
towers
sufficient training
constituted a
to
single
turn
confined
on
space,
a
and
dangerous piece of
Blastco's
equipment
and Ring
to
Corps'
make,
entries
you know,
were
dangerous piece of
simultaneous.
equipment.
The
Even
two
if you wouldn't be
maintenance
able to
tasks
get that guy to lose his
constituted
job,
simultaneous
show him,
operations,
make them
SIMOPs.
see what happens when they
SIMOPs
cut
can be
corners.
defined as operations occurring close together in time and place, which might interfere or clash with one another, increasing the risks of the activities or introducing new risks altogether. But Evergreen did not have a SIMOPs program in place at the time of the incident. which would have facilitated coordination between the two contractors who were performing work close together in time and place.
Contractor and employee safety at Evergreen's facilities would improve from the implementation of a SIMOPS program that considers the hazards of work occurring close together in time and place. Had Evergreen had a SIMOPS program, it could have foreseen the potential hazards of the two jobs being done at the same time so close
Yeah,
together.
because the
And
guy who
could
was
have put
supposed to be
measures in place
shadowing
to prevent
was probably
fatal
slacking the
injuries to
fuck
the
off,
Rimcore
wasn't he,
employees.
Aquilin? He was
The
off
last
to one
safety
side,
issue
not
identified
paying
by the
attention
CSB
to the guy
was the use
that
of
he knew
combustible
was not
materials of
trained for his
construction
job,
in the
but he
upflow
let do
tower
something
and crossover
dangerous,
line.
wasn't he?
The 5-gallon bucket of resin
And that is
the
what I
heat
mean
pumps
when
fell
I
into
say
did
that
not
your
contain enough fuel
coworkers
to
are
create a
just,
fire
you know,
of the
keeping an eye
size and
on
duration
your.
that
Oh
occurred
my
during the
God!
The CSB
Oh my
found that
God!
the upflow tower and crossover line,
I
which
am
were
not at all
constructed of
surprised.
combustible
I am
FRP,
not at all
both
surprised,
caught fire.
and I hate that I'm not at all
This
surprised,
contributed to the
Aquilin.
quick spread of smoke and
That is.
flames to the downflow tower,
Oh
where the
boy!
two Rimcore
Oh
employees
God!
were fatally injured.
Yeah, no.
When performing hazardous work inside a
Woo!
confined space,
That big old
it is
hole at the
always
top
critical
there.
that companies adequately understand and control hazards. This
Oh,
is even
dust.
more important if the
What you're
confined space is
hearing,
constructed
what
of
you're
combustible
hearing
material like
is that
FRP that can increase the
it can
severity
be
of a hazardous
that
event.
when you're
As a
that an
result of its
unsafe work
investigation
environment
into the
can come
incident at
from
Evergreen
either your
Packaging,
employer
the CSB made a
or your
recommendation to
coworkers,
OSHA to issue a
and both
safety
of them
information
need to be
product
held
addressing
responsible
the analysis
when they
and
might be creating
control
an
of
unsafe
hazards that
environment.
are not pre-existing, but which result from work activities inside permit-required confined spaces. The agency also recommended OSHA require owner-operators to ensure the coordination of simultaneous operations involving multiple work groups.
And so what the
including
CSB is doing here
and the
is
CSB
passing their recommendations.
reiterated a previous
They're passing the
recommendation
recommendations
to OSHA
off to an
to
organization
publish a
that
safety
actually
and
has
health
teeth.
information bulletin
Because the
addressing
CSB
hazards
doesn't
and
really have
controls
any teeth.
when using
On the other
flammable
hand,
materials
if
in
OSHA
confined spaces.
comes in and starts
The
making these
incident at
rules,
Evergreen Packaging
people
was
people
entirely
are
preventable.
legally required
Worker
to start
safety,
paying attention to these,
employees and
because
contractors,
OSHA
is a
rules
critical responsibility
are
of facility
legally
owners
binding.
and operators, whether the facility is operating normally or in maintenance and upgrades. We hope our report and recommendations will further inform industry about the risks inherent to hot work and confined space activities, and how those risks can be successfully mitigated. Thank you for watching this CSB safety video.
For further information, visit csb.gov.
To put it bluntly, oh, damn, that's impressive, Aquilin. That is damn impressive. That is damn impressive, and I love that. I love to hear that. You did your job right. You made sure people didn't get hurt. There's so many people that need to be, because the last thing you want to happen because of your job is that OSHA has to write a new rule. Because anytime that OSHA has to write a new rule, something has gone horrendously. Because I would like to reiterate what I said at the beginning of this stream. OSHA rules are written in blood. Every single rule that OSHA has implemented exists because somebody broke that rule. Somebody got hurt, and somebody might have died. Which is why I really, really get annoyed with people complaining about some of these. But anyways, moving along, let's go to something bigger, shall we? Let's go to an incident that I am much more personally familiar with. That being the Texas City explosion, BP refinery. Nice. And I mean, that's the thing. Out of is a lot of it is people seeing what looks like people think, oh, my job is so simple. It could go wrong. I can cut corn. And that's when people get hurt. You get lazy because you think your job is easy. And then, as a result, hurt someone. I think that, you know what I'm gonna say? You know what I'm gonna say, Aquilin? I think that on one hand, you were doing it for demonstration purposes. And because you were doing it for demonstration purposes, despite the fact that you were technically breaking a rule, because you were, despite the fact you were technically breaking a rule, you were doing it to demonstrate to your other, to your fellow, to your coworkers what could happen if they started cutting corners. But anyways, like I said, let's see how the Texas City refinery blew up. Don't worry about that though, Aquilin. I don't know anyone at OSHA.
The U.S. Chemical Safety Board is developing a new interactive training application focused on OSHA's Process Safety Management, or PSM, regulation. The training will cover the 14 elements of PSM using the 2005 explosion at BP's Texas City refinery as a model. Look for it soon at csb.gov. March 23, 2005, the BP refinery in Texas City, Texas. Several units at the refinery had been shut down for lengthy maintenance projects, which required nearly 1,000 contractors.
I'm just going to give a bit of background on this. They're going to go into much more detail, but I just want to give you a quick summary of what's going to happen here. In 2005, a refinery tower at Texas City, at the Texas City refinery, was overfilled to the point where what was effectively hot boiling gasoline started to spew out from the top of the tower, and then, mixing with air, eventually ran into the exhaust of a diesel truck, triggering a massive explosion. And I mean massive. When the Texas City refinery blew up, the Texas City refinery explosion is considered to be one of the worst industrial accidents. Now, let's see what happened in detail.
To be on site along with BP employees. BP had positioned a number of portable trailers close to process units for the use of contractors and other maintenance workers. Over a period of months, BP had located 10 trailers for workers servicing the Ultra Cracker unit, including a double-wide wood-framed trailer that contained 11 offices and was regularly used for meetings. Though these trailers were located near the isomerization unit, the occupants were not warned the ISOM unit was about to start up, a potentially hazardous operation. At 2:15 a.m. on March 23rd, overnight operators began introducing flammable liquid hydrocarbons, known as raffinate, into a 170-foot tall raffinate splitter tower used to distill and separate gasoline components. Near the base of the tower, there was a single
And now we get to see one of the first problems with this refinery that led to the explosion. See that little indicator on the base of the tower? That is meant to show personnel at the refinery how full the tower is. Now, the level on that tower should never, and I mean never, exceed 9 feet. And that is why the level indicator stops at 9. However, because of a desire to increase productivity and speed up their workflow, operators at this refinery would routinely fill the isomerization unit's tower far beyond that limit. And that is where our problem began. It led to them ignoring the alarms that would normally go off when the tower was overfilled beyond the 9-foot mark, as this had become a routine practice for them.
Instrument that measured how much liquid was inside. It transmitted this information to both a satellite control room and a central control room located away from the ISOM unit. But this level indicator was not designed to measure liquid above the
Alexa,
9-foot
volume
mark.
0.
During normal operation, the tower was only supposed to contain about 6
Yes,
1/2 feet
yes,
of liquid. But during
ignoring
startups,
alarms.
operators
Fatal
routinely
and
deviated
horrific
from
mistake.
written procedures
A horrific
and
mistake
filled
that
the
has led
tower
to many
above
fatal
the
accidents.
9-foot mark, concerned that if the liquid level fluctuated too low, it would cause costly damage to the furnace. At 3:09 a.m., as the liquid neared the 8-foot mark, a high-level alarm activated and sounded in the control rooms. But a second high-level alarm, slightly further up the tower, failed to go off. By 3:30 a.m.,
I would not be surprised if that second alarm had been intentionally disabled by employees who had gotten tired of it going off during their what they considered normal operation.
the level indicator showed that liquid had filled the bottom 9 feet of the tower and the feed was stopped. The CSB later estimated that the liquid was in fact at a height of 13 feet, but operators could not know the actual level because the indicator only measured up to 9 feet. The lead operator had been overseeing the startup from a satellite control room within the ISOM unit. At 5 a.m., he briefly updated the night board operator in the central control room about the startup activities. The lead operator then left the refinery early, an hour before the end of the shift.
And this is another thing that created a problem. Equipment was allowed to operate unsupervised. This, in turn, created a situation where there is a gap between basically, so equipment was allowed to operate unsupervised because this operator left early, an hour before the end of his shift. This meant that for a whole hour, no, Aquilin, because there was not a backup operator, because the next operator was supposed to arrive an hour after this operator left. There may have been an operator in the central control room, but remember, in the central control room, along with the isomerization unit, they have to monitor a much larger array of equipment, including things like the ultra cracker unit currently under maintenance by contractors, as well as any needs those contractors may have to do their work more efficiently. As a result, it was very, very easy for the unsupervised operation of the ISOM unit to go unnoticed by anyone in the central control room, especially as people in the satellite control room. Hello there, Vic. How are you doing tonight? Anyone in the central control, and as the operator in the satellite control room left before the next shift arrived, that is incredibly dangerous.
A new board operator arrived in the control room around 6 a.m. to start his 30th day in a row working a 12-hour shift. He spoke briefly with the departing night shift operator and then read the logbook to prepare for the startup. But the logbook did not clearly indicate how much liquid was already in the tower and equipment. And
oh boy, yeah. 12-hour shifts, which leads to overwork, and therefore fatigued operators. On top of that, note that last thing that they just said in the video. The logbook did not mention that the isomerization unit had already been filled. This is another major safety issue, where, because that's not in the logbook, the person coming in on the next shift might assume that the ISOM unit incomplete data, overwork, and as a result, a procedure is performed a second time. That redundant performance of procedures can lead to an incredibly, I'm going to use that phrase a lot. I'm going to use this phrase a lot, by the way. The phrase incredibly dangerous is going to come up multiple times tonight. Get ready for it. But anyways, that's what I was saying. The fact that he didn't know that the ISOM unit was full meant that, well, you'll see what it means. You'll see what happens.
it left no instructions on routing of the liquid feed and products when the startup resumed. Instead, the control board operator only found a one-line logbook entry that said ISOM brought in some RAF to unit to pack RAF with. At 7:15 a.m., the day shift supervisor arrived. Because he was more than an hour late, he received no formal briefing from personnel on the
Once again, more gaps in personnel, creating an incredibly dangerous situation, especially because this person who arrived late was not briefed on what had happened while he was before he came in for work. I don't care. As I say, yeah, this is a perfect storm of oh fuck. And this is again, like I just like to say, I am rough. I'm not in Texas City, but I am in the South Texas area, which means that I am very familiar with what happened because of this explosion. I got to watch this as a kid. It was interesting.
night shift about conditions in the ISOM unit. At 9:51 a.m., operators resumed the startup. They began recirculating the liquid feed and adding more liquid to the already overfilled tower. As new feed was added, startup procedures called for regulating the liquid level in the tower using the automatic level control valve. But the board operator and others had received conflicting instructions on routing the product. As a result, this critical valve was left closed for several hours, blocking the flow of liquid from the tower. A few minutes later, operators lit burners on the furnace to begin heating up the feed, part of the normal startup process. While the startup was underway, the day supervisor left the refinery on short
And another gap in personnel.
notice, just before 11 a.m., to attend to a family medical emergency. Contrary
Now, on one hand, he does have a legitimate reason for leaving early. A family medical emergency issue. But if you are leaving early, you have a duty. Let people know that you're leaving early and make sure that someone can cover for you. Something supervisor failed to do.
to BP's own procedures, no experienced supervisor was assigned to replace him. This left a single control board operator, now without a qualified supervisor, to run 3 refinery units, including the ISOM unit, which needed close attention. The refinery had eliminated a second board operator position following corporate budget cuts in 1999 after BP acquired Amoco. As the startup continued, the tower steadily filled with liquid, reaching a height of 98 feet.
Keep in mind, this tower is never supposed to exceed 9 feet. This is over 10 times the limit. Yes. Problem 6, short-staffed. Isn't it fucking wonderful, Dusk? So, we have a perfect storm where both employees and employer are disregarding safety procedures, and as a result, creating an incredibly dangerous situation. Isn't it wonderful?
Shortly before noon, more than 15
I need to change the
times
frequency on that bot
the
timer,
normal
by the way.
level.
Because, yeah,
But
it
the
is...
improperly calibrated level indicator told operators in the control room that the liquid was at 8.4 feet and gradually falling. Furthermore, the control panel was not configured to clearly warn operators of the growing danger. It did not display flows into and out of the tower on the same screen.
Dusk, I'm going to actually say something that's really going to be a little uncomfortable. And that is, this is not the fault of the people all the way at the top. This is the fault of middle management. This is the fault of the guys in the middle who are trying to get higher up to replace the guys up at the top. And as a result, they will cut corners. They will do anything they can to show how productive they are and why they should be the next guy up on top. It's not it's usually not the person at the top's fault. It's the next person down. It's the person who is looking to replace the guy on top when the guy on top retires. And so that's what leads to a lot of these situations is overly ambitious middle management looking for promotions Therefore, and then because of that, they try and increase productivity at the expense of safety.
Nor did it calculate the total liquid in the tower. Meanwhile, the maintenance contractors, who were not involved in the operation of the ISOM unit, left their work trailers to attend a company lunch, celebrating a month without a lost time injury.
Oh, the fucking irony!
At 12:41 p.m., an alarm activated as the rising liquid compressed the gases remaining in the top of the tower. Unable to understand the source of the high pressure, operators opened a manual chain valve to vent gases to the unit's emergency relief system, a 1950s-era blowdown drum that vented vapor directly into the atmosphere. Operators also turned off 2 burners in the furnace to lower the temperature inside the tower, believing this would reduce the pressure. Nobody knew the tower was dangerously full.
Keep in mind, Aquila, these are also contractors. And contractors tend to have much, when a contractor at a plant tends to have much less stringent safety standards than the plant owners and operators do. I emphasize tend to, because like we both said, like you said already, look what happened at Evergreen. Look at the conditions at Evergreen. But yes, a month without injuries for a contractor is a significant achievement. Now, if it was the plant, if it was BP celebrating a month without a lost time injury, that would be a very concerning thing.
The operators did become concerned about the lack of flow out of the tower and began opening the valve to send liquid from the bottom of the tower to storage tanks. But this liquid was very hot. As it flowed through the heat exchanger, it suddenly raised the temperature of the liquid entering high up the tower by 141 degrees Fahrenheit. It was now about 1 p.m. Contract workers, unaware of the startup and the looming danger,
unaware of the fact that less than 100 yards away is a fucking bomb. Poor bastard. I mean, how could they know? The plant operators never told them it. Which, let us go back to what Dusk said earlier. Problem number... Where are you? A. Problem B. Incomplete data. Problem 3. Incomplete data. Which of course, is what led to so many of these contractors not realizing the danger they might be in and proceeding with business as usual. Again, those poor bastards. They didn't know. How could they know?
In the corner room, closest to the blowdown drum. Over the next few minutes, the hot feed entering the tower caused the liquid inside to start to boil and swell. Liquid filled the tower completely and began spilling into the overhead vapor line, exerting great pressure on the emergency relief valves 150 feet below. At 1:14 p.m., the 3 emergency valves opened, sending nearly 52,000 gallons of flammable liquid to the blowdown drum at the other end of the ISOM unit.
Just for reference, keep in mind that said flammable liquid is basically gasoline. They are basically about to create a geyser of boiling hot gasoline, which upon escaping from the blowdown drum will almost instantly vaporize.
Liquid rose inside the blowdown drum and overflowed into a process sewer, setting off alarms in the control room. But the high-level alarm on the blowdown drum failed to go off.
Another alarm that I wouldn't be surprised if it had been sabotaged.
None of the operators knew of the catastrophe unfolding in the ISOM unit. As flammable hydrocarbons overfilled the blowdown drum, operators nearby saw a geyser of liquid and vapor erupt from the top of the stack. The equivalent of nearly a tanker truck full of hot gasoline fell to the ground and began forming a huge flammable vapor cloud.
It's about to get worse, Dusk.
The vapor cloud expanded in just 90 seconds, engulfing the unit and the nearby trailers full of workers. About 25 feet from the base of the blowdown drum, 2 workers were parked in a pickup truck with the engine idling. As flammable vapor entered the air intake, the diesel engine began to race. The 2 workers fled, unable to shut off the engine. Moments later, witnesses saw the truck backfire and ignite the vapor cloud. Powerful explosion.
And now we have come full circle. The chain of catastrophe is complete, and the explosion has begun.
Explosion swept through the area. The blast pressure wave accelerated through the ISOM unit, causing heavy destruction and igniting fires. The workers inside the trailers were right in the path of the explosions. The fires continued to burn for hours. 12 of the 20 occupants of the double-wide trailer were killed, along with 3 workers in a trailer nearby.
That's what I thought as well, Dusk. But did you hear that? There were 8 survivors. There were somehow 8 survivors in this incident. I don't know how the fuck they got lucky. They got so lucky. I don't want to know. Because this should never have happened in the first place.
180 workers were injured, many with serious burns, fractures, or other traumatic injuries. The wood and metal frame trailers were blown apart by the blasts. Firefighters struggled to rescue the injured and recover the victims. 50 large chemical storage tanks were damaged, and the ISOM unit remained.
Fair enough, Aquilin. Fair enough. Because, yeah, no. Actually, let us bring up the person that Aquilin is talking about. Because they are actually quite the figure. Quite the interesting character. One moment, please. The person that Dusk is talking about is somebody by the name of Tsutomu Yamaguchi. And Tsutomu Yamaguchi, as Quillen said, somehow managed to have both the best and worst possible luck in the world. He lived, so he was in Hiroshima on the day of the bombing. He was what he was doing at the time. So he lived and worked in Nagasaki, but he was in a business trip. He was about to leave the city on the day of the bombing and returned to work to get it, walking towards the docks when the bomb was dropped. Kilometers away. Find him temporarily. So, after the bomb hit, he managed to get to shelter. And then, on 9th of August, after receiving treatment for those wounds, he was back at home in Nagasaki and was reporting events to his supervisor when, guess what happened next? In Nagasaki, boom, another city gone. And again, super close to the bombing, to ground zero, but somehow he managed to not suffer any injuries this time. This man, again, had the best and the worst luck in the world. I'm not entirely sure how. But anyways, let's finish the follow-up here. Let's see what the CSB has to say, shall we? About the incident in Texas City.
Texas City was the most serious refinery accident ever investigated by the CSB.
Yeah. That's kind of a big deal. That was kind of a big deal. Like I said, the 2005 BP explosion, kind of awful, kind of horrific. Now here comes another incident. Iron in the fire. What the hell happened here? Only one way to find out, though. Now, this is going to be an older video, and as a result, it's not going to have quite the same production value. Which, well, I mean, that's just what happens. You know, like I said, these later videos, have much more production value put into them, because I guess someone at the CSB realized that by putting that production value into them, people would be more likely to watch and pay attention to them, and thus create more of an environment where employees, somebody who on a job site might have seen this and see what looks like one of these disasters, can try to stop it before it happens. So let's see what happened. Fire. Gallatin, Tennessee.
Everything
This
was
will
changed that
be
morning
interesting.
when Cody and I got to the hospital. The first thing the doctors told us, walking in the door, was he was burned 95% of his body, and we don't think he's gonna make it. There's nothing you can say to that.
January 31st, 2011. Two maintenance workers were troubleshooting a problem with a bucket elevator at the Haganese Powdered Metals plant in Gallatin, Tennessee. Suddenly, fine particles of iron dust ignited when workers attempted to restart the elevator's motor. The CSB investigation into that accident was underway when just 2 months later, on March 29th, a similar flash fire burned another Haganese worker. At a news conference in Tennessee on May 11th.
Good Lord. Oh, good Lord. So, not only was there an incident at this plant, there was an incident when this plant was under investigation while this plant was under active investigation for a previous incident. That's just fucking amazing. Oh God, no. Yeah, no.
The CSB
That's,
released laboratory test results
concerning.
demonstrating the combustibility of even small amounts of the iron dust when dispersed in air in the presence of an ignition source. Just 16 days after the CSB released those test results, on May 27th, a hydrogen explosion erupted in the plant. The blast shook loose iron dust accumulations from the upper reaches of the building, which ignited and rained down on workers.
Combustible dust is a serious workplace hazard across the country. Since the Chemical Safety Board was established in 1998,
So one of the most horrific incidents that I've ever heard of regarding combustible dust, which is what they're talking about here. The combustible dust, I'm actually somewhat familiar as a major hazard. One of the worst incidents one of the more shocking incidents that I'm familiar with was at a plant where they were processing powdered non-dairy coffee creamer, and shows just how dangerous things can be when they're a powder, because you don't think of coffee creamer as being something that can catch fire, much less explode. But in that sort of perfect mix with the air floating around, it is still effectively fat and carbohydrate. The same two things which also lead to so many horrendous and infamous explosions at flour mills. Another substance people don't think of as an explosion, which can very quickly turn into one under the right circumstance.
3 of the deadliest accidents we have investigated have been combustible dust explosions. They are entirely preventable, just like the dust fires that occur at Haganese.
The Haganese Corporation is a subsidiary of GKN, a multinational engineering company headquartered in the United Kingdom. The Haganese Gallatin facility, located some 30 miles from Nashville, employs about 180 workers in the production of powdered metals with a capacity of 300,000 tons per year.
There is specifically even a term, I don't know if for powdered metals, but there is a term to describe just how dangerous combustible powders can be. And it's a term that you often hear in relation to weapon systems that use materials like tungsten or depleted uranium, but is just as applicable to an industrial environment. That term is pyrophoricity. So pyrophoricity, pyrophoricity in a nutshell is what happens when a fine dust of a material, when a material that is normally not flammable can become extremely flammable when it's in the form of a fine dust or powder. One of the most common being aluminum, to the point where powdered aluminum is a popular choice for solid rocket fuel.
The main product is over 99% pure iron powder, used primarily in the automotive industry. The manufacturing process releases combustible metal dust into the workplace.
The dust must be controlled and not allowed to accumulate. But when the CSB examined the Haganese facility after each of the 3 accidents, we were alarmed to discover literally tons of accumulated dust on surfaces throughout the facility.
At the Haganese facility, iron powder travels through the plant by a system of conveyors and bucket elevators. The belts on the bucket elevators had a tendency to become misaligned, causing the motors to overload and shut down. On January 31st, 2011, a maintenance mechanic and an electrician were sent to inspect a bucket elevator that had just malfunctioned to see if the belt was off track. It appeared to be aligned properly, and the mechanics radioed the control room operator to restart the motor.
Hold on a second. Was that the Half-Life 2 civil protection radio sound effect? Let me just go back. I gotta hear that again.
Aligned properly.
Listen to that again.
Radioed the control room operator to restart the motor.
Not quite, but it sounds an awful lot like it. I have to say, I don't know what that actually is, but that just sounds an awful lot like the civil protection radio sound from Half-Life 2.
Dust collection bag house had been out of service periodically over the previous week. Fine particles of iron dust remained in the area of the motor. As the motor restarted,
oh God. Yeah, no, I can already imagine what happens here. Motor starts. A lot of the time when you start, particularly a big electric motor, you're going to have a lot of arcing. And I can already see just how horrendous this situation is about to become.
combustible iron dust was suddenly dispersed into the air. The 2 workers were immersed in a thick dust cloud. Almost immediately, the iron dust found an ignition source, likely an electrical arc from exposed wiring on the motor. A flash
Oh
fire
boy!
erupted, engulfing both workers. Both men were severely burned. The first worker died from his injuries just 2 days after the accident. The second survived for nearly 4 months, but died in May of 2011.
Good
After
Lord.
the first accident, the CSB documented that combustible iron dust was visible in the air and that it coated most surfaces up to 4 inches deep. These CSB investigation photos show the accumulated dust on elevated surfaces, where the dust could be readily dislodged and ignited. The CSB report noted that engineering controls, such as enclosing conveyors and installing properly designed dust collection equipment, are the best ways to prevent dust accumulations. But as this CSB investigation video shows, the plant's powder handling equipment was not adequately sealed. Combustible dust was always present in the air inside the plant. In this investigation video, dust particles ignite and sparkle as they contact an indoor hydrogen gas flare from one of the plant's furnaces.
That should not be happening. I would just like to reiterate, that should never be happening. You should never have flammable dust accumulating in an area where it can come into contact with an ignition source. Even worse, where an ignition source is an integral part of the process. This is something that I would not be surprised if it had been reported repeatedly to OSHA before the CSB's investigation, and every single, and then, half measures have been taken to just barely comply with anything OSHA said before returning to business as
And employees told CSB investigators that dust collectors were often down for maintenance. Housekeeping measures were the last line of defense for removing the large amounts of dust that constantly accumulated on plant surfaces. But the CSB found that housekeeping at Haganese was ineffective. Those conditions led to a second serious accident at the plant, less than 2 months after the first deadly flash fire. On March 29, 2011, a Haganese engineer attempted to reconnect a gas line to a 20-foot-high furnace following maintenance, but he was having difficulty. Standing on a ladder held by a second worker, he tried hammering the line into place. As the hammer struck, iron dust that had accumulated.
So here, once again, just like at the BP refinery, we are getting an opportunity to see the perfect storm of not just management failing to create a safe work environment. We're also seeing employees working in a very unsafe way, leading to that unsafe work environment being even worse. And once again, as Aquilin said, this is why you need, as being Aquilin, I've been saying, you need to make sure that your coworkers are not doing things recklessly, because that's the first step. Making sure that your coworkers aren't being reckless, the first step to making sure that a horrendous accident doesn't happen.
On the side of the furnace was lofted into the air. The iron dust ignited, burning the engineer, who jumped and fell from the ladder. Partly protected by a heavy flame-resistant coat, he received first and second-degree burns to both of his thighs.
The buildup of so much iron dust near a furnace with open flames and hot surfaces was a recipe for disaster. A fire was basically inevitable the moment the dust was lofted into the air.
Even small amounts of iron dust can produce intense flash fires when ignited, as demonstrated in the CSB's laboratory testing.
The danger of a metal fire, such as what we're seeing here with these iron dust, the fires that these produce are so intense that they are categorized as their own class of fire that require special equipment to extinguish when they get beyond a simple flashlight. They're called Class D fires. And and not just powder, burning metal. The fires that result from burning metal are an absolute nightmare to deal with. So much so that in many cases, the equipment and it reminds me of a story. It reminds me of a story of how to make a Class D fire even worse. Are any of you familiar with the book Ignition? Because the book Ignition has a lovely story about a procedure, let's explain what the book Ignition is about. The book Ignition is an informal history of rocket development, and there is a whole section in that book about exotic oxidizers used to make rockets that would burn more energetically and run more efficiently than simply using liquid oxygen. And one of the more interesting oxidizers that was tested was a substance known as chlorine trifluoride. And John C. Clarke's own words about chlorine trifluoride, I think, say it better than I ever could. So let me just pull that up, because it is a wonderful quote. Wonderful quote about chlorine trifluoride. You see where it is. I don't know, Jesse Clark. Ignition, chlorine trifluoride. Quote. Where are you? Structural metal. Might get me. Go. Here we are. Chlorine trifluoride, or CTF as the engineers insist on calling it, is a colorless gas, a greenish liquid, or a white solid. It is also quite possibly the most vigorous fluorinating agent in existence, much more vigorous than fluorine itself. It is, of course, extremely toxic, but that's the least of the problem. It is hypergolic with every known fuel, and so rapidly hypergolic that no ignition delay has ever been measured. It is also hypergolic with such things as cloth, wood, and test engineers, not to mention asbestos, sand, and water, with which it reacts explosively. It can be kept in some of the ordinary structural metals, steel, copper, aluminum, etc., because of the formation of a thin film of insoluble metal fluoride, which protects the bulk of the metal, just as the invisible coat of oxide on aluminum keeps it from burning up in the atmosphere. If, however, this coat is melted or scrubbed off, the operator is confronted with the problem of coping with a metal fluorine fire. For dealing with this situation, I have always recommended a good pair of running shoes. So, I should explain what the term hypergolic means, because hypergolics are a fascinating class of chemicals, or rather, class of reactions, because some chemicals that you might not even think of are just hypergolic with each other. They react. So, what does hypergolic mean? Well, hypergolic means some. What does hypergolic mean? What does hypergolic mean? So, hypergolics. Hypergolics refers to a class of reactions, refers to the fact that in some cases, some substances will react violently with each other. And those reactions will happen at specific temperatures. The temperatures where this happens at are what determines if a substance is referred to as hypergolic. For a substance to be hypergolic, the temperature at which it will react explosively has to be below the ambient temperature, and the reaction in question must also be violent and energetic. So basically, if these two substances touch each other, so much as touch each other, they will light on fire or possibly explode. And this is what John C. Clarke is talking about when he says that chlorine trifluoride will start fires on contact with sand. It doesn't need a spark. It doesn't need an ignition source. Chlorine trifluoride is the most evil shit ever to be created. And I swear to God, I love using it in Children of a Dead Earth because it makes rockets. The only substance I can think of that makes a combustion rocket, work better is an even more insane substance called dioxygen difluoride, which combines the wonderful reactivity of fluorine with the wonderful reactivity of oxygen, which means that this stuff is aptly named foof, because that's the noise it makes when it decides that it doesn't want to exist anymore. Of course, that is if it doesn't want to exist in open air. Because if you try to confine it and foof decides it doesn't want to exist anymore, it's going to make a very different sound. But anyways, back to the iron fires now, shall we?
If just an ounce
Yes,
of dust
boom.
can produce such
Very
a
much
serious
boom,
fire,
Dusk.
you can imagine the magnitude of the fire and explosion hazard from the estimated tons of dust accumulated at the Hagenese plant.
Still, Hagenese and its corporate parent GKN did not take effective measures to control the dust hazard. Around 6 a.m.
I too
on the
enjoy
morning of May
cost cutting.
27th, 2011, operators near one of the plant's furnaces heard a hissing noise that they identified as a possible gas leak. They believed that the leak came from piping somewhere below the furnaces. Inside a trench under large steel covers. 6 mechanics were sent to find and repair the leak as another operator stood by. They assumed it was similar to another recent leak that involved nitrogen, an odorless, non-flammable gas. Unknown to the workers, the leak actually involved a different odorless invisible gas, highly flammable hydrogen, used in the plant's massive annealing furnaces.
Oh boy. So hydrogen is a very interesting substance. I rather like hydrogen because most of the time, hydrogen behaves itself. But every once in a while, it decides it's gonna act up. And this is one of those cases where the hydrogen decided, for one reason or another, it was gonna act up. You see, hydrogen in a normal atmosphere is pretty good about needing a spark in order to cause trouble, which means that as long as you maintain as long as you maintain an environment where where there aren't sparks, hydrogen will usually behave itself. You might have a leak, but again, as long as you avoid a spark, you can prevent terrible accident. And also, Aquilin, that is a much spicier substance you're talking about there. Because you're not just talking about ordinary hydrogen. Because you're talking about the hydrogen bomb, aren't you? No, that is the much spicier deuterium or tritium. In fact, the most common substance used in that sort of scenario is a very interesting substance. It is a metal hydride referred to as lithium deuteride. And lithium deuteride is used because, unlike regular hydrogen or regular deuterium, it does not have to be kept under cryogenic conditions. This makes it easily storable. Now, lithium deuteride does have a relatively short half-life, which means that the lithium deuteride in bombs needs to be replaced on a regular basis. I want to say it's about 20 years. I don't remember exactly. Basically, they have to periodically replace the lithium deuteride in these bombs to make sure that, the bomb still works. Oh, but as we can see here, now this is one of the, back to the hydrogen. The hydrogen here is about to misbehave because they're probably about to introduce a spark.
Using a forklift, maintenance personnel removed a trench cover above the area of the suspected leak. As the cover was wrenched upward, metal sparks ignited the hydrogen, causing a powerful explosion.
Pick up the phone, because I fucking called it.
Hydrogen continued to leak from piping, fueling
Oh
a jet flare.
boy.
The force of the explosion
boy.
lofted large quantities of iron dust that had accumulated on rafters and overhead surfaces. Falling clouds of dust ignited.
Also, can I just say for a second, I know that this is supposed to be a very serious industrial accident explanation, but this shot right here looks like some shit out of a PS1 game that I swear I played years ago. Can I just say, like, just the burning forklift, the dust that periodically catches fire and flares up? I don't fucking know, Dusk. I don't know. But let me put it this way. This incident was serious enough that not only was it investigated by the CSB, as you saw at the beginning of this video, many of the relatives and friends and relatives, many of the people working at this plant or their friends and relatives had to give testimony before Congress. And any time an incident is big enough that something has to be testified before Congress, not only is someone going to lose their job, someone is going to prison. And someone is probably going to prison for a very, very long time.
As they contacted the flames below, visibility was reduced by the large quantity of dust in the air. One eyewitness
Oh my
reported
god, this
that
really does feel like a PS1 survival horror game. Like this cutscene, I'm just waiting for the monster to come out of the darkness, and then it just flashes to the title screen. Seriously, does this not feel like something you would see in a PS1 survival horror game as like its intro demo sequence?
With a flashlight, he could only see 3 to 4 feet ahead as he tried to escape. 5 workers, including the operator standing by the trench, and 4 of the mechanics, were injured. 3 of them with severe burns. 2 of those workers would die from their injuries within days. The 3rd injured worker succumbed 6 weeks later. The CSB noted that on the day of the accident, maintenance crews were allowed to work without testing for dangerous...
Aquilin, that is a very, very good question. That is a very good question. Let me see. I'm just going to pause this and actually real quickly, because I actually remember hearing about the Radium Girls. The events that surrounded them was fucking insane. Radium Girls. Let me make sure they're what I thought they were again. Ah, yes. Yes, they are what I thought they were. But let's see if the CSB has anything about radium. Or is this an incident? Oh, no. No, I don't think they do, I don't think they do, Aquilin. But we also have to remember that is a much older incident. That is something that happened in the 1920s, I want to say. Radium Girl. Was this factory workers contracted radiation poisoning? Yeah, this was in the 1920s. The CSB was only established in, let's see, CSB was established in 1998. So, unfortunately, yeah, I don't think there was really much of an opportunity for something like for the CSB to do something, or not even much of an opportunity, much of a point for the CSB to do something about the Radium Girl, because for all the failings, for all the industrial accidents that do happen, one thing that is very well understood among pretty much every industrial sector these days is that you do not play careless with radioactive material. And that is a lesson that was very recently, that was also people were particularly reminded of, not just by the Chernobyl accident, but by an incident in Japan with Hisashi Ochi, who with one of his coworkers, was it one or two of his coworkers, created a prompt criticality event where by pouring radiological material into a goddamn bucket. They poured radioactive material into a goddamn bucket at such a rate that it went prompt critical and flashed them with enough radiation that they were dead men walking. And I'm pretty sure that anytime anybody is working at any facility to this day where they are working with that kind of material, that is the first thing they are shown on their first day of the job. I would not be surprised.
Concentrations of flammable gas, and that the facility had no procedures to properly mitigate flammable gas leaks.
Yeah, no, the Demon Core experiments were another thing, but also, Dusk, remember, those were much earlier. Those were back when our understanding of radiation and what it would do to you was, how do I put this? Primitive. So, and it's also worth remembering, these were people at the edge of what was, at the edge of physics at the time. These were highly experimental theoretical physicists. The people that everyone assumed knew what they were talking about. These are the guys at the peak of their field, and here they are fucking around with the core of a nuclear weapon, and again, they flash themselves with enough radiation that they're dead men walking. Oh God, kill me.
Hagenese did not have an effective mechanical integrity program, allowing corrosion in piping to go unnoticed until the piping failed. And despite mounting evidence of a serious hazard, Hagenese did not make major improvements in its dust control program. Hagenese tested its powdered metals for combustibility in 2009 and 2010, following warnings from an insurance audit about the potential for a dust explosion at the plant. The company collected and tested 3 powder samples.
Cat. Yeah, no, I know about the radioactive toothpaste. The radioactive toothpaste is some shit. Also, can I just mention real quickly, you missed me going on a rant about Hisashi Ochi and how he got an ouchie. How Hisashi Ouchie got an ouchie. Because they were they were working with buckets of radioactive material to the point where it led to a prompt criticality incident that killed them. There's no other way of putting it. It killed them. It killed them. And it killed them in a very excruciatingly painful way, I might add. Because, oh, yes! Oh! Yes, Hisashi Ochi was in, let me see what that incident was called. It was the Tokai Mura nuclear accident of 1999. I would just like to say that again. 1999. This is not an old incident. Well, it is kind of now. It's 2019. Well, 20, it's about 23 years old. And what happened is, so here's what happened at Tokai Mura in 1999. About so they were using, they were in a facility that took uranium hexafluoride, also known as yellow cake, and it turned that into uranium dioxide, one of the more common forms that uranium is kept in to be used as nuclear reactor fuel. What ended up happening here is that the uranium oxide would be dissolved in nitric acid to produce a substance called uranyl nitrate. Now, this was supposed to have been done with a set of equipment that would carefully meter the amount of uranium hexafluoride introduced into the nitric acid, which is already an incredibly dangerous substance, to make sure that the concentration of uranyl nitrate never exceeded a critical level. However, because of pressure to increase efficiency on the company that operated the let me see here. Oh yes. Because of pressure on the company operating the plant to increase efficiency, they started skipping several steps. Workers there started skipping several steps. What ended up happening as a result is that instead of dissolving the uranium hexafluoride in the nitric acid in the metered dissolving tank, it was dissolved in a bucket. I would just like to say that again. It was dissolved in a goddamn stainless steel bucket, which was then poured into a precipitation tank that would, crash out the desired end product. This meant there was no metering to make sure that the level of uranyl nitrate in the tank at any given time, that there was no that the level of uranyl nitrate and its concentration was not kept below critical levels. As a result, the contents of the bucket went prompt critical. Just to explain what prompt critical means. The prompt critical means that in that moment, in that instant, there was enough uranium-235 dissolved in that bucket that for a brief moment, that bucket was an active nuclear reactor. That bucket was an active nuclear reactor for a few microseconds. And as a result, it flashed an intense amount of radiation that hit all three of the workers performing this procedure. This was not a good place to be. And as a result, the three workers experienced what is very wonderfully described as acute radiation syndrome. Basically, the amount of radiation they were exposed to was enough to they were rendered dead men walking. Their bodies, over the course of about a week, started to liquefy. Between 3 or as Jared Harris, let me just explain. Here's how Jared Harris in Chernobyl put it so eloquently, because I think he describes it better than I could ever hope to. Not that one. Where are you? Where are you? Let me just make sure that's not
in 2000.
broken. Good. That's not what I need. Go here. I had this for a little while because I'm up a scene from Chernobyl that I think describes what happens when you're exposed to that radiation way better than I could ever hope to. Radiation. Legasov explains radiation poisoning from 2019's HBO special Chernobyl. I think this is just something that y'all need to see to understand just how horrendous radiation poisoning can be.
What will happen to our boys?
The divers.
Divers, the firefighters, the men in the control room.
You
or does
die.
the radiation
That's
due to
what happens.
size?
But you die in an excruciatingly painful way.
The level some of them were exposed. Ionizing radiation tears the cellular structure apart. The skin blisters, turns red and black. This is followed by a latency period. The immediate effects subside. The patient appears to be recovering. Healthy even, but they aren't. This usually only lasts for a day or two. Then the cellular damage begins to manifest. The bone marrow dies. The immune system fails. The organs and soft tissue begin to decompose. The arteries and veins spill open like sieves, to the point where you can't even administer morphine for the pain, which is unimaginable.
That's what happened to those 3 men at Tokaimura in 1999. Their bodies were effectively shredded on the cellular level by the intense radiation.
9, all of which...
Now, back to another horrendous industrial accident, much closer to home. The Haganese Gallatin iron explosion, or iron fire,
had combustible properties similar to the dust later collected and tested by the CSB. Haganese was also aware of the combustibility of iron dust because earlier flash fires had occurred when maintenance workers used welding torches on dust-covered conveyor belts.
When the Haganese facility was built more than 30 years ago, it was not designed according to good practice guidelines on combustible dust, such as those set forth by the National Fire Protection Association, or NFPA. And during its decades of operation, it was never redesigned to address the serious dust hazard.
The Haganese facility has numerous flat overhead surfaces where dust can accumulate, and they are difficult to reach and clean. NFPA 484, the standard for combustible metals, recommends that floors, elevated platforms, and gratings be designed to prevent dust accumulations and to facilitate cleaning. The NFPA standard also requires that all machines that release combustible dust be connected to a dust collection system.
Once again,
The city of Gallatin...
Once again, Aquilin. Once again, said this before, we'll say it again. And this is why I had this as my live notification. Safety rules are written in blood.
requires industrial facilities, including Haganese, to comply with the International Fire Code. The code includes a brief chapter on combustible dust. The chapter references the far more detailed dust safety standards of the NFPA, but does not specifically require companies to follow them. As a result, the CSB recommended that the International Code Council revise the International Fire Code to mandate compliance with the combustible dust safety requirements set forth by the NFPA. In its 2006 study on the hazards of combustible dust, the CSB recommended that the Occupational Safety and Health Administration create a combustible dust standard for general industry. In response, OSHA initiated a national emphasis program in 2007 to target industries with combustible dust hazards for additional inspections and enforcement.
Oh no, Mechanicat, Guyana! You know what's funny about Guyana? Do you know what's funny in the worst possible way about Guyana, Mechanicat? Would you like to know? There is evidence, and I'm gonna get a little current events, a little spicy here. Bear with me here. There is evidence that Russian soldiers at the Chernobyl facility in Ukraine have been picking up and looting highly radioactive material from waste pits and disposed vehicles and exposing themselves to dangerous levels of radiation. Regardless of your opinions on the war, which I have my own, which I won't express here, because, yes, they did! They dug trenches! You know what? Fuck it! I am gonna express my opinions on the war! Because, you know what? I'm pretty sure they're not controversial! I'm pretty sure my opinions on the war in Ukraine are far from controversial because, well, to put it bluntly, it's an illegal war being waged by the Russians, whatever. But yes, they dug trenches in the Red Forest. The Red fucking Forest. They dug trenches in the Red Forest. Now, the thing about that is the level of radioactivity in the Dusk! Do you not know about the Red Forest? Do you not know about the Red Forest? Oh no, I have to explain the Red Forest now. The Red Forest is so you're familiar with the Chernobyl accident of 1986, right, Dusk? Where the reactor blew up? One of the consequences of that is that a forest near the power plant was exposed to a very high level of was exposed to an enormous amount of radioactive dust. Dust that was then pulled up through the trees, which led to them dying. One of the things that the Soviets did to make sure that those dead trees wouldn't burn and spread their poison across the continent is they cut them all down and buried them. By doing so, the soil was now filled with these radioactive rotting trees. Now, this wasn't actually quite so bad because the level of radioactivity in the soil over the past 25 years has gone down significantly. It's not enough to kill you. It's enough that you have to worry about getting cancer when you turn 50. It's enough that you have to really start worrying about cancer once you're in your 50s, like 30, 20, 30 years down the line, but it's not going to kill you. They didn't stop there though. As they dug these trenches, they started finding themselves digging into unmarked waste pits. Waste pits that contained much more radioactive substances. Yeah, they were digging up radioactive soil for trenches, Dusk. They were doing some incredibly stupid shit. And there's even talk that one of them might have accidentally shot at the no-no box. Somebody shot at the no-no box. Someone shot at the confinement facility or the reactor. Maybe not on purpose. Maybe it was a shot aimed at something else and it missed. But someone shot the no-no box. And I'll let you imagine just how bad that can be. I'm not joking.
2 years later, OSHA announced it would begin rulemaking on a comprehensive standard for general industry.
And I'm announcing today that OSHA will begin the...
No, it's not going to be Chernobyl squared, Dusk. It's just that these people were being very reckless, and as a result, they had started releasing some of the radioactive dust that was left over from Chernobyl. This is nowhere near as bad as what happened in 1986. It's incredibly stupid, it's incredibly reckless, and incredibly dangerous, but it's not as bad as what happened in 86. Nothing can be as bad as what happened in 86. You had an open core burning, an open reactor core burning. There is nothing aside from a repeat of an open core burning that could be even remotely as bad as an open core burning.
Rulemaking on combustible dust.
But in 2011, at the time of the accidents at Hagenese, a specific standard had not yet been proposed or completed. As a result, in its final report on the accidents at Hagenese, the CSB recommended that OSHA develop and publish a proposed combustible dust standard within 1 year, and ensure that the new standard includes coverage for combustible iron and steel powders. Meantime, until the dust standard is completed, the CSB recommended that facilities like Hagenese that handle iron and steel powder should be included in OSHA's National Emphasis Program for combustible dust.
It is a tragedy that 5 lives were lost at the Hageness facility from these accidents. The CSB believes that adhering to recommended industry practices will greatly reduce the potential of a future dust fire or explosion.
Dust fires and explosions continue to claim lives and destroy property in many industries. More must be done to control this hazard. No.
Also, I would also just like to remind you, this is not just government coming down on industry and telling them what to do because, like some people might say, no. These are rules that other members of the industry have had input on. These are practices that industry had input on to make sure that they knew what they were doing. And that makes this even worse, Hagenese, because when it's not just it's not just government regulators, but also your own counterparts, your other companies in the industry telling you should do these things. Because remember, industry has input on these sort of regulations. Other members of the industry are saying you should do these things and you don't. That makes you look even.
More lives should be lost from these preventable accidents. Thank you for watching the CSB safety video.
For more information on
Oh
the CSB's
boy, iron dust fires are fun, aren't they? I love industrial accidents, don't you? Oh boy. But now we're going to take a little bit of a tangent. We're going to go off on a little bit of a tangent and look at something completely different. Something that I think is personally quite fascinating, and I think that you might hope that you too might also find interesting. This is an old series this is an excerpt from an old video called Modern Missiles. And I don't know what it is about it, but I find this video utterly fascinating. Modern Missiles.
Today, the world of missiles ranges from giant
No, I don't want that.
ICBMs to slim
that.
rockets fired by
There we
supersonic
go.
fighters, to the small handheld weapons steered by a lone foot soldier, but capable of knocking out a main battle.
Oh, I see what's going on here now. Okay, yeah, no, it's just the aspect ratio of this video is different. I thought something was going wrong with OBS.
Cruise missiles, which are really unpiloted bombs.
And by the way, if there's something you think that would be cool to share, let me know so we can watch it together.
Air Force in the world. This missile is
the TOW.
TOW stands for Tube-Launched, Optically Tracked, and Wire-Guided Missile.
The TOW is still in service with multiple countries to this very day. It is far from an old system. The TOW is... Yes, it is! Yes, it is, Coquillin! But really, the system topical to today's events is not the TOW, but really the Javelin. However, the TOW is a foundational system that established some of the ideas that would later be expressed by the Javelin. Particularly the idea that a weapon could be created to give infantry the ability to fight tanks. And that is something we are seeing today. That tanks on their own. Javelin is pretty based.
It is the
Yes, tanks should never be alone. Tanks should absolutely never be alone. Because if a tank is alone, that means that somebody can come up to that tank, especially in a city, and kill that tank with relative ease. Because tanks fucking blind.
West's most important anti-tank missile. And there
Thank
may
you
well
for
be
that,
more
Dusk.
TOWs than any
Yes,
other type of
my legs are okay. Ooh. Hear that, stretch things out, top up our fluid level. Much better. Excellent.
missile in the world. Hughes Aircraft has delivered over 400,000, and production is continuing. The TOW is a hefty missile weighing about 45 pounds. Cumbersome, but not
Go
too heavy for
here,
use by
go
infantry.
there.
TOWs are carried by jeeps, Hummers, cargo trucks,
Go
and
here.
marine RAVs.
Go here. Make a little adjustment.
Employed as the main anti-tank weapon of the Bradley infantry combat vehicle, it can also be mounted on the Cobra, the Apache, and Britain's Westland Lynx. The operator simply acquires the target through a scope that has been bore-sighted exactly parallel to an optical sensor. In this simulated combat footage, filmed through the gunner's sight, the deadly effectiveness of a helicopter-launched TOW is evident. The target is destroyed even though it's moved for cover. The missile is fired from its tube by a quick-burn rocket.
There we go.
Until it's far enough from the operator for the main rocket to ignite.
And this is one of the most fascinating parts about how not only the TOW, no, I do not, Mechanicat, and now I'm scared. And now I am very scared to what the radioactive Boy Scout might be, because those are 3 words that should never be put together. So, let us know what it is. Let us know what it is, shall we? Let me know what that is. What is the radioactive Boy Scout, Mechanicat? Because that sounds utterly fucking fascinating, and at the same time, utterly fucking terrifying.
At the same time, a bright light appears
Oh,
in the missile's
no,
tail facing
no,
astern.
no, no,
As
no.
long as the operator keeps his sight on the target, the light is automatically kept exactly on course. Steering commands generated in the optical sensor are
Oh, him! Him! I remember him! That was actually very cool! Yes! He made a functional nuclear reactor! It was a Boy Scout who made a functional nuclear reactor! Oh, God! How did I forget about that? Oh, boy! Oh, boy! Oh, boy! So, I forget what his name is, but I know exactly what you're talking about now, Mechanicat, because that is one of the most insane incidents. The radioactive Boy Scout. What was his name? That was David Hahn, who, let's see what he did. Creation of neutron source. At the age of 17! At the age of 17, he built a functional nuclear reactor. The absolute madman. The absolute fucking madman. Oh no. Let's see what happened here. So it looks like in order to create this reactor, here's what he did. You ready for what he did? Because this is the weird shit. So in order to get the material he needed for his I'm going to say it again, functional nuclear reactor, what he did was he stole smoke detectors. He dead ass just stole smoke detectors. I want you to think about that for a minute. This man here stole smoke detectors to get the americium out of them, to use that as a source of neutrons to make his reactor work. On top of that, let's see what else he did. Oh, no. That was a separate incident. No. His name was Dave. Oh, who the fuck is Senku? Who is Senku? Senku. Oh, are you talking about Dr. Stone, Dusk? No, because he's not a Dr. Stone character. I mean, sure, he sounds like a Dr. Stone character. Wait, excuse me, what the fuck, Mechanic Hat? He called a lab and he was able to bullshit them to give him radioactive material. Are you serious? Are you absolutely serious? The absolute madman. The stones on this guy. Good God. Are you fucking serious? No, let's see who this fellow is, actually. Radioactive Boy Scout. Let's see what comes up when we look at him. Yes, Nani the fuck indeed. Nani the absolute fuck. Yeah, no, I could see that. I could see that, Aquila. I could see how he might be able to talk someone into that. But at the same time, you would think that there would be somebody else there realizing he's not just asking for advice on like some engineering or something like that. He's talking about acquiring nuclear material. He's talking about acquiring exotic radioactive material, the kind of shit that requires extensive paperwork with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, even for government offices and government contracts to get their hands on. Let's see what they have. Let's see what has to be said about this now, shall we?
If you'd like to vote on future subjects and get early access to videos,
boy.
then you can from just $1 per creation. Link in the description below.
God.
The channel has hit the big time.
God damn it,
this video
Mechanic
is proudly
Cat.
sponsored by NordVPN.
Oh, let's see what
More
we have
about
to
that
say.
later
Let's.
on. The idea of a teenager attempting to create a breeder reactor in a garden shed is equally worrying as it is impressive. The story is a case of someone who clearly was very intelligent, however not necessarily wise, as he managed to turn his mum's property into an EPA Superfund site. Of course, today we are looking at...
Wait, hold the fuck up. A Superfund site. He managed to turn the area where he was building his reactor into a Superfund site. That means that on top of the radioactive material he was working with, he contaminated the soil, possibly even the local water table. What the absolute piss-soaked fuck were you doing, David Hahn? How did you contaminate the soil and water table with your fucking Eagle project?
David Hahn, or better known as the Atomic
Oh my
Boy Scout.
good lord! That is horrendous. That is horrendous. I
David
do
was
not
born
enjoy
in
this.
1976 on the 30th of October in Royal Oak, Michigan.
Yes, they are intense, Aquilin, but are they intense enough that would justify the creation of a nuclear disaster zone?
Which is about here on a map. As a toddler, his parents Ken and Patty Hahn divorced, meaning that David would split his time living in both parents' respective households. At an early age, he discovered an interest in science. When given a book called
You know what, Aquila? Let's find out whether or not he did, because I'm gonna go with no. I'm going to go with no. He did not. But let's see what happened to him, shall we? Let's see exactly what happened to him.
Book of chemistry experiments. Several experiments required corrosive hydrochloric acid, as well as some other industrial solvents. I mean, the book was from the 1960s, and health and safety was kind of non-existent back then. I've had a brief flick through a PDF of it, and I think the book is pretty cool, and very trusting in some of the things it explains. However, it was eventually pulled off the shelves for its slightly dangerous content. A lot of the timeline in this video is based off a secondary source in the form of Harper's Magazine from November 1998. Even though it's a secondary source, the writer Ken Silverstein had interviewed directly many of the people involved in the whole Atomic Boy Scout story. I've also read the...
Are you fucking joking? He managed to get Eagle from his nuclear reactor experiment. Holy shit! The stones, the absolute brass balls. Honestly, at this point, I'm not even mad. I'm just impressed. I guess that if you are ballsy enough that you make a nuclear reactor in your own home, even if it turns the area around said reactor into an eagle, into then I guess you deserve your fucking Eagle Scout. You know what? I guess you fucking deserve your Eagle Scout.
IAEA report on the cleanup, and this has
Oh
formed the
boy.
basis of the information I have on the environmental impact of the incident. By the age of 12, David was reading college chemistry textbooks. It seemed he had been bitten by the...
You ain't got the stones. Watch. And they just built a fucking nuclear reactor. Yeah, that sounds about right, Dusk. That sounds about absolutely right. Yeah, no, that's kind of what I was expecting an Eagle project to be, Aquilin. You built some plumbing. You did some. You created an irrigation system. You did something like that. Not creating a nuclear reactor.
Science bug. In his early teens, he set up a home laboratory in his bedroom at his dad's
boy.
house. However, multiple number of explosions and chemical spills sent his experiments to the basement. By the age of 14, he had managed to make nitroglycerin, showing both genius as well as a flagrant disregard for safety, which would be a good indicator of things to come.
You know what, though? You know what I'm legitimately surprised of, and I know why it's not, but I'm still legitimately surprised, is you know who I'm surprised doesn't have a video on this guy? You know who I'm surprised hasn't made a video about the Atomic Boy Scout or the radioactive Boy Scout? I'm surprised that the CSB hasn't, not because of the reactor itself, but because of everything that led up to it, where he was not only creating nitroglycerin, but repeatedly had several of his experiments explode.
Moved to the basement allowed his experiments to go further unchecked.
Because this is some absolute batshit insanity. I'm just trying to process
school career
how the
well.
fuck
However, he did
somebody is able. I'm just trying to process how the fuck somebody managed to not only do that, but repeatedly get away with it. It's one thing to do these things, right? It's one thing to blow yourself up because of an experiment. Yeah, I guess that would do it, Aquilin. I guess that would do it. I mean, sure, his parents were separated. His parents had divorced. But I guess that's what they mean when they say parents should support their children's endeavors. Some of us build nuclear reactors. Some of us become VTubers. Who would have thought?
Mainly in retail and fast food. This was to bankroll his experiments and to fulfill his dream of owning every element in the periodic table, including and especially the radioactive ones. One particular incident would change the location of his operations once again. One evening, an explosion left David semi-conscious on the floor after he had been pounding on red.
Well, Aquilin, now that you Aquilin, now I'm guessing you're in a position where you can do that. Yes, so you know what? Go and make your napalm. Go and make your napalm in a bucket. But don't come crying to me when it burns you.
Phosphorus with a screwdriver. Needless to say.
You want to know what the craziest part is, Aquilin? It's not illegal. It's not illegal to make napalm. It's not even illegal to make a flamethrower. You can, I'm not sure how much paperwork is involved, but you can, in the US, legally own a flame. Let me see how many states it's legal in. How many states let you own a flamethrower? Flamethrowers are legal in 48 states. Flamethrowers are legal without restriction in 48 states. So pop the fuck off and make you that fucking flamethrower. Pop the fuck off and make that fucking flamethrower. It is legal in 48 states as long as you don't set anyone on fire with it. So make sure, no, you know what? Make the flamethrower. Don't use it on anyone. That's the only thing. Just don't use it on anyone. No, that's a blowtorch, Aquilin. That's not a flamethrower. That's a blowtorch. That's a propane torch. You could do much better than a blowtorch. You can do much better legally. So yeah, no, like I said, just don't hurt it. As long as you don't hurt anyone.
This got Davy's laboratory kicked out of his father's house.
So yeah, no, like, also that means you're giving Elon Musk money. And, I do not approve of giving Elon Musk money.
House, needing somewhere to experiment.
I don't like Elon
moved his
Musk.
lab to his mother's garden shed. Some worrying signs were not picked up by his stepdad and mum when Davy...
Not yet, Mechanicat. Not yet. Well, we got to the part where he was talking about how he was bankrolling his endeavor to own every single element on the periodic table.
Gas mask for some of his experiments. David was enrolled into the Boy Scouts of America in an attempt to give him direction and something to aim toward the rank of Eagle Scout.
This was a mistake.
Now, to achieve Eagle Scout, you have to earn 21 merit badges. Some are compulsory, such as first aid and community badges. However, some others are up to the person to select. And of course, there was an atomic badge.
Well, Aquilin, considering that he was building his own breeder reactor, that was probably his plan for U-235. He was probably going to use that reactor to create... Yes, was. Because, I mean, yeah, no, the guy's dead, actually.
Which, as a side note, was sponsored by Edison Electric, so unsurprisingly, the pamphlet was very pro.
I wouldn't be surprised if the reason you don't have that badge anymore is because of this guy in particular.
Nuclear. He gained his atomic badge in May 1991.
I wouldn't be surprised at all if he is the specific reason that badge doesn't exist anymore.
This would be important later on. David's ultimate plan after his research was to build a breeder reactor. However, this was a rather far-off ambition at this time, due to him not having any plutonium or uranium to hand. But he would try and change this.
Oh boy.
Let's have a quick overview of what a breeder reactor is. A breeder reactor creates more fissionable material than it consumes. This is great, as it creates more bang for your buck when it comes to fuel. A breeder reactor uses uranium-238,
oh no, that's terrible.
Which is much more abundant than the rare U-235. In theory, a breeder reactor...
Yeah, no. I'm entirely not. I'm not entirely surprised that. Okay, so one thing would be if it's no longer called that. But from the way you're saying this, it sounds like the badge as a whole is gone, which is kind of a damn shame.
Can extract almost all the energy in the fuel. In comparison, a conventional reactor uses only around 1% of the energy available. Such a reactor essentially solved the nuclear waste question.
Like,
how
I get why you might not want to have a badge called stalking anymore, but at the very least, all you gotta do there is rename it. Alexa, stop. That's what I was saying. It's like, sorry about that. I had to shut something up. It's fine. But anyways, that's what I was saying. It's one thing when you have a it's one thing when you rename a badge because that name is not exactly a great name to have, but it's another thing entirely when you just get rid of the badge as a whole. Oh, they did. Oh, neat. Actually, that's kind of neat. And I guess somebody realized that, hey, the problem isn't the badge itself, it's the name. Oh, wow. That's actually really. Oh, they only brought it back for 1 year. That's bullshit. That's bullshit. That's absolute bullshit.
This type of reactor.
Oh, let's see what he did with this reactor now, shall we?
Complex to operate. Plus, in most cases, the type of coolant used is a liquid metal instead of water. This is because water would act as a moderator, slowing down.
Night, Dusk. Yeah, get some rest. I'm telling you right now, get some goddamn rest, Dusk. Don't keep yourself up because of me.
The neutrons. And this type of coolant can become dangerous when exposed to moisture. The first step would be to build a neutron source and see how far.
Once again, I'm just going to say, if there's anything you think would be interesting for us to watch, let me know and I'll pull it up. I'll take a look at it, and then if it's not too awful, if it's not too spicy, we'll give it a look.
Build what he called a neutron gun to bombard isotopes with neutrons. Easier said than done, as he needed to get a hold of some radioactive material. Using the pamphlet he had gained from his atomic badge, David started contacting the people listed within, for example, NRC and Edison Electric. And posing as a high school teacher, contacting the NRC proved to be very helpful in his plight for some advice on how to locate what he needed. David was put in contact with Donald Erb, director of isotope production.
And this is where things go horrendously wrong.
With advice on how to isolate isotopes, as well as providing a list of ones that would be the best to sustain a chain reaction. Well, that would turn out to be a bit of a mistake. Now, armed with everything he needed to know, David made a list and set out to find the materials out in the wild, and surprisingly many were used in everyday items, albeit in small quantities. But that wouldn't stop Mr. Hahn. Now, our friend AM241, which was featured in the Atomic Man video, was one of the isotopes on David's list. And if you remember from my previous video, that AM241 is used in smoke detectors. Whilst we're on the subject, if you haven't yet, check out my Harold McCluskey video, aka The Atomic Man. Uranite could...
Don't tell me that somebody else was taking americium from smoke detectors and using that for his own. Let's see here. McCluskey. Americium. Let's see what the hell this person was up to. Oh, okay, no, he wasn't stealing it. He just got exposed to radiation. Okay. That's still a very, very scary thing to be dealing with. But that's not as bad as I thought it was gonna be. I'm not even gonna lie.
U238 and U234.
Yeah, no, Aquilin, I'm pretty sure that they've either changed how the smoke detectors work, or they've made the americium very difficult to get, to the point where you have to be unbelievably dedicated to get enough americium to be able to do anything with it.
Thrive in small quantities.
So I don't know what you're planning, but
America.
don't think about going to like steal smoke detectors. That's not a smart idea.
25 is found out in the wild, so to speak, on old glow in the dark clock faces and hands. The reason why they...
Oh shit! Who was it that mentioned the Radium Girls earlier? Who was it that actually mentioned that earlier? Let's see. Radium Girls. Radium Girls. Who mentioned the Radium Girls? Ba 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 da ba ba da ba. You were the one that mentioned the Radium Girls. God damn it, Aquilian. Because remember you mentioning them? Well, he's about to talk about them.
In old style clocks and not modern ones is that the people who used to paint on the radium tended to die of cancer. And because of this, it was phased out of use for less deadly glowing chemicals. I'm thinking I should cover this in a future video. Let me know in the comments.
Oh boy.
Thorium can be found in certain types of gas lanterns, which again is readily available to find, especially...
Would you like to know about one of the more interesting things about gas lanterns, by the way? There are groups of people who insist that because the thorium was removed from the gas mantles of Coleman from the gas mantles sold by Coleman, the lantern's gas mantles no longer work as well, and thus insist on buying third-party gas mantles that they check with a Geiger counter to make sure that they contain thorium. This is actually one of those things that people who use gas lanterns for camping insist is true, even when people test it and it's shown to be, at best, a minimal difference.
Especially for a Boy Scout.
Oh,
However, with all the
boy.
isotopes listed, each item only contains a minute amount.
Oh.
For the easy-to-find items, such as the lanterns and clocks, David accumulated these from anywhere he could, buying from antique stores and camping supply shops. Claiming it was for a report, David managed to get hold of a large amount, around 100 broken smoke detectors, at a fraction of the as-new cost. Once he had collected what he...
Yeah, bruh indeed. Absolute bruh moment, Mechanicat. Everybody who was in charge of trying to make sure somebody wasn't going to be buying shit to do something incredibly stupid had a bruh moment because this guy was saying, it's for an Eagle project, sir. It's for my Eagle Scout project. Don't you understand? And thus a series of bruh moments continued to happen, one after another, after another.
Placed it inside a block of lead. Inside said block, he placed a tiny hole to focus the alpha rays containing protons and neutrons. David placed in front of the hole a sheet of aluminium. Aluminium absorbs alpha rays and emits a neutron. He couldn't detect that his contraption had worked with his type of Geiger counter until he introduced paraffin to measure the protons given off when hit by neutrons. This neutron gun was similar to the experiment that helped discover the neutron. He hoped to use his new neutron gun to make some fissionable radioisotopes. He set out to hunt for uranite as a source of U-235 in his car. However, he didn't have much luck on that front and decided to contact a supplier to see if they would just post him some instead. After pretending to be a professor for a college to a Czechoslovakian supplier of radioisotopes,
oh god. So what you're saying is this guy, this motherfucker, managed to bullshit a supplier of... Yeah, this part is fucking amazing. He bullshitted a supplier of radioactive isotopes to get one of the most heavily restricted radioactive materials in the world. That's fucking amazing.
Samples contained very small amounts of U-235 and U-238. David attempted to extract these from the ore by using some homemade sulfuric acid and a coffee filter. Needless to say, this didn't yield the intended results.
Yeah, I can imagine.
But not disheartened, David set his sights on thorium-232, which can produce U-233 if bombarded with enough neutrons. He sourced the thorium from gas lantern mantles he had bought and burnt them into an ash using a Bunsen burner. To purify the thorium in the ash, David needed lithium. Lithium can be used to bind with the oxygen attached to the thorium dioxide, meaning the thorium would be better for David's needs. To get hold of enough lithium, he ordered around $1,000 of batteries and harvested from within by cutting
Game knows game, I guess.
Filled an
I mean, I fucking guess, Aquilin. That would do it.
Purifying the thorium to around 9,000 times the level found in nature.
That's absolutely fucking amazing.
Was to bombard the thorium-232 with neutrons to create U-233. However, his current neutron gun was nowhere near powerful enough. So David needed to make something...
He bought enough gas lantern mantles! He bought enough gas lantern mantles to not only... to create nuclear reactor fuel! What the fuck is wrong with this person?
Potent.
Oh.
Now this leads us rather neatly to...
Fuck your sponsorship. I don't care about your sponsorship. Go away.
Souped up neutron gun. For this, David needed to get hold of a large amount of radium. Knowing that radium was present in vintage clocks, making the time easy to be read at night, David searched junkyards and antique shops, scraping off any paint he came across. Using barium sulfate sourced from the X-ray ward.
And this is already barium sulfate, already adding even more fun and spicy chemicals to the mix.
for his badge, David liquefied it by heating it under a Bunsen burner.
Is that just his excuse? That's just his solution to everything. That's just like, yeah, no, we need this shit. Let's just light some shit on fire, and that'll get me the thing I need. What? The absolute fucking madman. He just keeps lighting shit on fire until he eventually made a nuclear reactor.
Liquid was then mixed with radium and
I mean, apparently it did, Aquilin. Apparently it did.
strained through a coffee filter, later dehydrating
Oh
the
my
solution
good lord.
into crystals, which was
Oh
then
my
stuffed
good
into a
lord.
block to create his neutron gun. Instead of aluminium, he managed to get his hands on a more potent neutron emitter, beryllium. He bombarded the thorium and...
By the way, would you like to know something about beryllium? Would you like to know something about beryllium? Beryllium is incredibly toxic. Beryllium is unbelievably, incredibly toxic. And as a result, yeah, no. But on the same note, along with being incredibly toxic, it produces very light and strong alloys to the point where at one year, I want to see who it was that did this. Beryllium. Start here. So it's incredibly toxic to the point where it causes a condition called beryliosis, where if you inhale the dust, you're dead. You die. No questions asked. You just die. Stop living. But on top of that, because of its usage, its ability to create very light and strong alloys, I want to see who made this. Formula One. It was a Formula One. McLaren. That's who it was. McLaren made an engine with their pistons. What year was this? Mechanicat, you might find this particularly fun, Mechanicat. What year was this? What year was the McLaren engine? Shit. McLaren beryllium engine. Was this? Because this was hilariously unsafe. When was this? Is Ferrari's car performance 1998. The McLaren Mercedes engine was able to. So what happened is McLaren made an engine that could rev as high as the Ferrari engine, which up until that point had been extremely dominant. But because it was able to do this with a longer stroke, McLaren had much more power in their engine. However, because of the fact they were using a beryllium aluminum alloy to use this, the engines in question were also incredibly toxic. Yes, they did, Mechanicat. They banned it in 1999. They banned beryllium in 1999 because of the concerns that, again, beryllium is incredibly toxic.
Uranium with his radium.
It can cause, and because an engine is an environment where metal where metal rubbing against metal can quickly form metal dust. Oh! Let's see what else they did here. Ban beryllium. Well, yeah, no, I'm not entirely surprised about that. I'm not entirely surprised about that either, Aquilin, because that's the thing. So I have opinions about motorsport, particularly about how different motorsport organizations and their attitude towards cheating, or what could be construed, or not even cheating, but their attitude towards clever interpretations of the rules. And this is an area where Formula One and NASCAR in particular are incredibly different. You see, when a team in NASCAR, yes, that was Mika's car. The McLaren in 1998 had beryllium pistons and beryllium cylinder liners. So, that was a spicy engine. That was a very spicy engine. But anyways, I was gonna say, that's what I'm saying. So Formula One and NASCAR have two very different attitudes to when somebody interprets the rules very cleverly. And I think there is a phrase that describes the attitude NASCAR in particular has towards that. And that is, the best way to cheat is to break the rules before they're in the book. There is a respect in NASCAR for when a team does something clever, for when a team finds a way, finds a loophole in the rules, and then does something cool with it. This is not the case in Formula One. Instead, in Formula One, you have teams. What teams will do instead is they will cry and cry and cry and cry about about how something another team did is illegal, but at the same time, try to figure out how to make their own version of it. And of course, assuming they can, the instant they do, they shut the fuck up because it's like, no, we got it. Yeah, no, the politics of F1 are terrible. But I will say this much, Mechanic Cat. I'll say this much. Bringing back ground effect has made the actual racing in F1 much better than it was before. Much, much better than it was before. But the politics of F1 are absolute bullshit. The only series that has the only time I can think of that where the politics of another series were nastier. Yeah, they do. They absolutely do, Aquilin. They have a long history of throwing hissy fits when somebody does something they didn't think of first. And it's fucking amazing. Yeah, no, ground effect is fucking great, isn't it, Mechanic Cat? Although the porpoising problem has been hilarious to watch, especially because the teams that are affected the most by it are the teams that were dominant before the new ground effect rules. And so seeing this sudden upending, this like upending of the order has been amazing to watch. Oh, God. But I was also going to say, do you want to know an event that makes the politics of Formula One look downright genteel? You probably know about this one, Mechanic Cat, but everybody else here, you need to hear about the split of 1996. Because 1995. But yeah, the split is one of the most insane events to ever go down in motor. Yes. No, not the US Grand Prix. Not the US Grand Prix. I'm talking about the Kart Indy Racing League split. The Kart IRL split. Because what's his name? Tony George owned Indianapolis Motor Speedway, and he saw how kart was changing to have a higher budget, to have a lot of foreign drivers, and he thought this was going to be unsustainable. So he split off with the Indianapolis Motor Speedway to create his own series, the Indy Racing League. This, however, created a nasty situation because although he had the track, he didn't have any of the drivers, at least not yet. The drivers were still with Kart, who would go on to continue running their own racing series. However, this is not where things got particularly bad. Where things got particularly bad was the next year, 1996, the first Indy 500, where the Indy Racing League and Kart would be running their seasons separately. And alongside the Indy 500, Kart was running a race at Michigan, the US 500. The US 500 was a fucking farce, and that would go on to define the ugliness of the split. Because right after the Indy 500, where a bunch of absolute nobodies that pretty much nobody outside of the most hardcore fans of American, wingless sprint racing down in the middle of Indiana, down in the Midwest, had ever heard of, like nobody outside of like people in the Midwest heard of these drivers. They managed to put on a fairly boring and slow race, but nothing bad happened. But then the US 500, starting right as the Indy 500 ended, came in with all the cars, all the drivers from the kart series that people knew. And on the first lap, on the first corner of the first lap, well, I say first corner, it's an oval, so ovals only have two corners unless it's Indy or Pocono. Unless it's a special oval, there are only 2 corners at an oval. No, don't let anyone tell you ovals have 4 corners. They have 2 corners. I like oval racing, but ovals only have 2 corners unless it's Indy or Pocono or something special like that. I swear to God, this is one of those things where like I keep hearing them say like turn 3, turn 4. Hey there, Pepper, how are you doing? Also, can I just say I love that name. I love that name. Obsessed with Pepper. That's a great fucking name. Can I just say that? Also, what the hell does any of that mean? What the hell does any of that mean? What does any of that mean, Pepper? Explain now. Why are you just flooding with letters? Who are you? What did you come here to do? Explain yourself, Pepper. I demand to know what do the letters mean? What do the letters mean? Oh God. What do they mean, Pepper? What do the letters mean? But anyways, yes, no. The split. And then, so in the 1996 US 500, on the first lap of turn 1, on the first lap at Michigan, there was the kind of pileup you would expect to see from a bunch of people on their first day of an iRacing league, where, you know, like bronze level. I don't like iRacing, but I forget these are just like bronze level, no experience. These guys. The crash at the 1996 US 500 crash was absolutely insane. If I can pull this up. Ah, yes, the start. Here we are. This is the start crash I'm talking about. Watch this shit. Watch what happens when they come over the start line and the safety car pulls out. Watch what happens. Oh my God, they are building up the hype. You know, most qualified, all the drivers you know, the most famous, all the famous drivers, the famous teams, and watch what happens next. And pile up. Absolute fucking disaster. Absolute fucking farce.
It looked like one of the cars went directly 90 degrees to the right, so we're not quite sure.
Oh my God. And remember, this was right after the Indy 500, right after the Indy 500, where the rival series, the Indy Racing League, once again, although it was a bunch of nobodies, they put on a fairly uneventful race where nothing went terribly wrong. And this is where the downfall of kart began. And it would only get worse from here. This is not even the most this is not even the most famous incident. The most famous incident would be in 2000 and when was this? The Firestone Firehawk 600 of, let's see what year it was. Firestone Firehawk 600 2001 Texas Motor Speedway. Would you like to know what happened at the 2001 Firestone Firehawk 600 Mechanicat? Because this was a race that never happened. This is a race that never happened because it turns out that during testing for it, they did not account for the fact that kart cars were much, and I mean much faster than their Indy Racing League counterparts. So Indy Racing League cars in the early 2000s at Texas would average a speed of about 220 miles an hour. That in metric, that is, let me see, about 354 kilometers an hour. So 220 miles an hour, 350 kph. Kart cars average 235, which is about 380 kph. That is an order of magnitude faster. And because of that, the drivers were experiencing an average, once again, average G load of 6G. This is not peak G load like at some tracks in Formula 1, like the Istanbul track, where drivers will experience 5Gs, like 5Gs on one corner, on the one big corner. No, this is an average G load of 5G. Drivers were blacking out. And as a result, they didn't know and because of when this happened, when they realized that drivers were blacking out, it was too late to do anything about it. They had to cancel the race, but they didn't tell anyone that they were canceling the race. So then people showed up. At the race, expecting it to happen, and they were just told, nope, race is over. No, we don't have the money to refund you. Sorry. Tough luck. I think you can imagine the kind of absolute clusterfuck that resulted from it. So, at this point, CART is looking pretty stupid. CART is looking pretty goddamn stupid. And on the same note, the Indy Racing League is turning out to be an incredibly boring and corrupt racing series where drivers are where track owners are basically resorting to the very same practices of parsimony, of not giving good prize purses that led to the formation of a CART in the first place. So things don't look particularly good, right? Well, CART gets a bit lucky for at least a little while, because CART manages to find sponsors and reorganize as the Champ Car World Series. This doesn't last particularly long, though, because this is also right after 9/11, and they're kind of suffering from their attempts to do international expansion. They're still reeling from the previous entity, from CART's. No, the Champ Car World Series is still reeling financially from CART's attempts at international expansion. But because they exist, it lights a fire under the Indy Racing League's ass. And around 2008, when the two finally merge back together, we actually start to see what we see is a series that is in very poor health, but a series that also isn't on its deathbed. American open wheel racing was almost killed by the split. So, like, IndyCar as a whole, CART, the Indy Racing League, and now IndyCar had to learn some very, very hard lessons from the split. And it's only after the 2010s that they finally managed to even kind of recover. It also doesn't hurt that the biggest beneficiary of the split and the group, and so there's a conspiracy. Okay, I'm stuttering. I should stop and explain. There's a conspiracy theory about the split. There was a conspiracy theory about the split, specifically that the split might have been caused by someone at NASCAR realizing that there was internal tension in American open wheel in the CART Indy race in the CART and the IndyCar racing series and the various IndyCar series, and stoking that tension so that people would stop watching it and watch NASCAR instead. This is not entirely verified, but in a bit of glorious, delicious karma, now NASCAR is the one suffering. Although the new next-gen cars are quite good, NASCAR was the one that suffered in the 2010s as IndyCar managed to rebuild itself. And on that note, I will leave you with that for next time. For now, though, we're going to go and say hello to Hal, who is currently celebrating his 2-year anniversary. So, go see what he's up to, shall we? And as for the raid message, there you go. That is our raid message.